Having looked at the IELTS exam as a whole, in this lecture we're just going to focus on the speaking component of the exam in depth. So let's get started by looking at some key points that you need to know. First of all, as we know, the speaking part comes last in the exam, usually following the writing exam, and it's broken up into 3 different parts. The exam altogether, the speaking component altogether, will take around 11 to 14 minutes. Part 1 will be around 4 to 5 minutes, Part 2 around 3 to 4 minutes, and Part 3 about 4 to 5 minutes, like Part 1. You will speak to a real life person, not a machine, like in other exams like TOEFL and so forth. And you will be told when the test begins, so you don't need to worry about being examined from the moment you walk in to the room with the examiner. You will be told once you are being judged. And the test will be recorded as well. They will tell you this on the day. This is more for training purposes, but also in case you want your exam to be remarked. So part 1 is called the interview stage, and this part of the exam is where the examiner will introduce themselves to you, and they'll ask you to introduce yourself by confirming your identity through your passport or identity card. They will then tell you that the test has begun, and will ask you a few general questions on familiar topics like work or home or family or friends. Now, there is no set number of questions, but you can usually expect to be asked about 4 or 5, depending on the length of your answers. And with regards to the length, there is no need to create extended, developed answers here. This section, you should use this section to help you relax into the talk. Imagine you're talking to a friend and just talk naturally like that. If you were talking to a friend, you wouldn't just say yes, no. Same thing here. Don't just give yes or no answers, but at the same time, you wouldn't give essay length answers. So nice natural, maybe 1 or 2 sentences to each of the questions asked. Let's have a look at some examples. What is your job? Do you like your job? What do you study? Is it a popular subject? How do you spend your free time? What do you do at weekends? What does your home look like? How long have you lived in your home? How many people are in your family? Do you have any pets? Very general questions. Sometimes you might also be asked why, often in response to your answer. But you shouldn't feel the need to develop any of your answers too long. As we say, these are fairly simple questions. Now, part 2 is called the long turn. You probably know it as the topic card section. So in part 2, the examiner will give you a task card or a topic card which asks you to talk about a specific topic with further prompts to help guide your talk. You will be given 1 minute to prepare and make notes to help you in your talk, and then you will be told when that 1 minute has passed. After that, you'll be asked to perform your talk for 1 to 2 minutes. Ideally, you should try to get it closer to 2 minutes than 1 minute, but you will be told to stop once the 2 minutes are up, even if you're sort of in the middle of a sentence. So do try to make sure your talk is just under 2 minutes if you can. The examiner may also ask you a follow-up question based on your talk. This is more likely if your talk was a little bit short, but it's also possible even if you reached the full 2 minutes. So be prepared for that. Some example cards now. Describe the person in your family who you most admire. Describe an interesting historic place, an experience you had with animals, a piece of technology you find useful, an important decision you had to make with money, a restaurant that you like to go to. Notice there's a variety of tenses here. Describe an experience you had with animals. Describe a restaurant that you like to go to, past and present. So do be prepared to speak in a variety of tenses. They want to be able to judge and test whether you can do that. Let's have a look at part 3. This is called the discussion stage. Even though it's called the discussion stage, it's really just you answering questions. The examiner here will ask you questions related to the topic that you spoke about in part 2. So if you were speaking about restaurants in part 2, then part 3 will be about restaurants or food or something similar. Now, these questions are made to give you the chance to discuss more abstract issues and ideas. There is no set number of questions, just like in part 1, but you can usually expect to answer around 3 questions that you can usually take around 4 to 5 minutes. Now, answers to these questions, as you can probably guess, should be longer and more developed than answers to part 1 questions. If you've watched my course on writing task 2, you should try to think of your part 3 answers sort of like body paragraphs in writing task 2 in your essay. The examiner will tell you when the exam is over, at which point you can breathe a sigh of relief because you've just finished the whole exam. Okay, so let's have a look at some example questions. What kind of books are popular with children in your country, and why do you think that is? Do you think people pay attention to advertising on television? Why is this? Have relationships between parents and children changed in recent years in your country, and why? And what jobs can be affected by different weather conditions, and why? Notice those last 2 questions are about topics that could easily come up in part 1, family and the weather. But notice that they invite much more developed answers, and they also can contain elements of other topics, like weather at the end there also contains an element of a question about work. So be prepared for questions like that. Okay, so that was just a brief look at the speaking component in IELTS. We will go into much more detail on these sections within the bulk of the course. So in sections 2, 3 and 4, we'll be looking at part 1, part 2 and part 3 in more detail. For now, we'll finish up this section here, section 1, by looking at how the examiners mark your speaking performance.